order. This is the continuation of meeting number 66 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. The committee is meeting today to discuss future business. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. And where we last left off, when we suspended P.S. Beach, you had the, virtually, you had the floor, and you have your hand raised. So P.S. Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, members. It's great to see everyone. I thought it would be good for us to kind of recap where we currently are, given where we left off in our last session. We were disagreeing on the path forward for future business for the committee. Conservatives had advised that they were willing to filibuster to prevent the study of the fall economic statement. And we decided to suspend so that further conversations could take place over the constituency week. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of those conversations as respect for the confidence of all my fellow professionals who are around this table, but I do think it is valuable and probably productive if I can highlight where I think we fell short on our side, because I don't actually think we're that far apart. The biggest thing for us is not receiving certainty in being able to study the fall economic statement in a timely manner in order to make sure that its measures can be implemented to benefit Canadians. Those are measures like eliminating permanently interest on student loans, implementing the recovery dividend. Other measures are in there, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but generically, to grow the economy, make life more affordable, and try to keep our country on a viable fiscal and responsible fiscal track. If we can find a way to close this gap, I think there is still a way. We can meet the needs of all negotiating partners at the table. I'm somewhat saddened that we weren't able to do it over the constituency week, but maybe I can put on my Adam Chambers socks and find a path here in the room. And I would reiterate to my friends across the way. I have a track record with whether it be the member of Carleton, the member for Abbotsford, the member, I'm going to get the name wrong, Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola. I hope I got that right. Apologies to Mr. Albus if I got that wrong. And of course, the member for Calgary Forest Lawn, that I think we can still find a path, and I am confident we can find a path today. It might not be exactly the way that negotiating members would be happy with, but I think if we zoom out and think about the working of this committee between now and Christmas, I think there's still an opportunity for a Merry Christmas for everyone, and that is my hope of what we can accomplish today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, P.S. Beach. And so I did start a list here. We have MP Baker up next, then I have MP Zerowitz, then I had MP, I believe it was Lawrence next, and then Morantz after that. Yeah, so MP Baker.
Thanks, Chair. So it's good to see members after the constituency week, and I hope everyone had a good constituency week in their ridings. I think this is a really important issue that we're debating right now. I think as we're all aware, there's a number of important components in this bill. There's a number of important deliverables for folks in this bill, and I think it's important that they be delivered for folks in a timely way. So I'm thinking of things like the permanent elimination of student loans. I'm thinking about a range of home affordability measures. So, for example, the creation of a new tax-free first home savings account, a doubling of the first-time home buyer's tax credit, ensuring that property flippers pay their fair share. These are the kinds of things that I hear about, especially property flipping, from folks in my community all the time. Another piece that's important, I think, is enhancing the Canada Workers Benefit, so to ensure that payments are delivered quarterly for low and medium income Canadians. I think there's a lot of people around this table who are really concerned about the inflation that Canadians are struggling with, the cost of living, but especially low and medium income Canadians. And so this is an example of something that I think is really important. And I think in light of what's happening in terms of the cost of living that people are facing, the rising cost of living, and I think in light of the measures that are in this bill and the impact it could have on folks, I think we have to take it upon ourselves to study this legislation in an expeditious manner. I think that's what our constituents would expect of us. So it would have been my hope that we could have, we could adopt the motion at our last meeting, so that we could hear today from officials on C-32. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that. To be frank, given we haven't gotten to that place yet, I'm just concerned about our ability to study this in a timely manner. And ultimately, if we don't do that, then we're not going to get the sports to the people who need them in the time frame that they need them. So I'm therefore proposing an amendment. I could propose the following amendment: that after the words "be invited to appear with her officials on the bill," we delete the word and that we add the following after the words "in the committee's full study of the bill," and the words would be, "and should the bill be referred to committee by Thursday, November 24th, A, clause-by-clause study of the bill commence no later than Wednesday, November 30th, B, amendments to the bill be submitted by 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Thursday, November 24th, and that the committee immediately proceed to the study and hear from officials from the Department of Finance." So I'm happy to circulate the language to members of the committee, but in the end, the purpose of this proposed amendment really is to ensure that we study this bill in an expeditious manner and deliver the help to folks who need it in the expeditious manner and in the manner and on the timelines that they would expect us to do so.
Thank you, MP Baker. And with that amendment, you've received it, Clerk? Yes? Okay. And Clerk will distribute? Yep. Okay.
Mr.
Great.
Chair, I'd view that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, it's a friendly amendment. I do have on this now. I did have MP Zarowitz. Your hand was up. I'm not sure if it's down now or down. Okay, I think that's down. Okay, down. So then I've got MP Lawrence, MP Morantz, MP Blakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of committee. I think a little bit of process has to be understood here as the normal operation of the way that Parliament works is that, first of all, bills are debated in the House of Commons. We don't even know exactly what the bill will be before us or the form it will take, as it can be amended in the House of Commons. And so presupposing a pre-study beforehand, I think is premature at best. Reckless, perhaps, is a better word for that. So, I think it's very much the position of our party that we want to have a full understanding of the legislation before we consider studying. As I said, the form of it could dramatically change. We're in a minority parliament. Certainly, large amendments could make, and so studying it now just doesn't make any sense. And I also think it's important that we look at the context of which this bill is being dropped into. We're at a 7-year record of disappointing economic result after disappointing economic results. In fact, I would dare say that the fiscal update could really be called a failure update. Consider this is a document created by a Liberal government. In that document, it says that we're going to have high interest rates. We're going to have continued high inflation. And It even projects potentially a recession coming forward. In the downside analysis, it has 2 negative quarters, which is the technical definition of a recession. So when we look at that and we look at the track record, quite frankly, of this government, of not being transparent and not being open with Canada, I don't think it necessitates a filibuster, but rather a discussion of the issues. And given the lack of transparency, and if we go through sort of the failures of this government to be transparent, whether we start with the Aga Khan, which the Prime Minister took an illegal vacation, was actually found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner of illegally accepting a vacation from, and then we continue on to this story of lack of transparency and a government that was supposed to be open by default. We go on and we look at the SNC-Lavalin affair, where we saw an attorney general, a minister of justice, who, by her own words, felt pressure to interfere in an investigation. These are sacrosanct principles that this government is continuing just to wave over and push over. So you'll have to forgive me, members, Mr. Chair, if I'm going to insist on transparency and accountability, because we are His Majesty's loyal opposition. Our job is not to be an audience, not to simply clap and applaud failure after failure after failure, but it is to be in opposition. And we're going to insist on the principles of democracy being upheld. There's no doubt that some members on the other side, some of the Liberal members, will object to the fact that they're being held to account. I mean, it doesn't feel good, especially when you look at their tremendous record of failure. And then we move from the SNC-Lavalin to the WE scandal. This was incredible. During a time when our country was facing a crisis, that the government was looking to give nearly $1 billion to an organization which would give members of the Prime Minister's family hundreds of thousands of dollars. Once again, I'm sure that this government would have loved to pass that legislation through, for the opposition just to be an audience, and we would have just all looked the other way as this organization with its troubled history and its funding of the Trudeau family. They would have loved for us just to not do what we're supposed to, not do our proper due diligence as members of Parliament, which of course includes doing the appropriate studies at the appropriate times. Pre-study is by no means the regular way this House operates. I myself have a private member's bill that just completed the second voting, and we'll have our second hour of debate, and we'll have our vote on Wednesday. But I don't get to have that debated at Foreign Affairs Committee until it's been dutifully passed, which is the way this is meant to operate. Because, as I said, there can be amendments in the House. That debate can also inform the committee as it goes forward. And so just simply looking the other way is not how Conservatives want to operate. We want to properly investigate, have the proper debate, and let's look at this. Look at the track record. Quite frankly, this Liberal government has not earned our trust. They continue to let Canadians down, whether we look at SNC-Lavalin, the WE scandal, or we look at the Aga Khan. And now we understand that the Prime Minister had a $6,000 hotel room, a $6,000 hotel room, at a time when Canadians are struggling just to get by. And quite frankly, when we look at what's in a lot of this fall economic update, is that this isn't what the folks in my riding are asking for. The single moms who are having struggles just to get by, the farmers who are facing perhaps restrictions on key ingredients of what they need to make their farms work, whether it be fertilizer, what they are looking for, what they come to me, they don't talk to me about a 2% tax on share buyback. That's not what they come talking to me about. Even students who I'm sure would student loans interest is an issue, but that's not what they're coming and talking to me about. what they're coming to talk to me about is that unlike every generation that preceded them, they can't afford a house. They can't afford a house. There are so many folks living in their basement. There are students going to food banks. There are larger economic issues. The reality is, unless we get the inflation beast under control, whatever good this government may attempt to be done will simply be eroded or eliminated by inflation. Let's look at the impact that inflation is having on Canadians, on middle-income Canadians. This government came to office pledging to do everything they could do for the middle class and those attempting to join the middle class. And all that the middle class has seen over these past 7 years is their economic ability, their economic strength eroded, corroded, reduced, and even eliminated. The average Canadian, when we look at an inflation rate, whether it be 6, 7, 8%, that's eroding their purchasing power. If you're earning $60,000 a year, you at 8%, you're losing thousands of dollars for you to buy what you need. That's on top of the fact that taxes already take more from a Canadian than food, shelter, and transportation combined. The NDP love to talk about greed, but they fail to mention government greed. And the government's actually seen higher revenues during this inflation period. They've seen bigger increases in revenues than Loblaws, than any oil company. It is the government greed. It's the government greed. But we don't hear about that. But yet, even with this massive amount of inflation tax that are coming in to fill the coffers, this government wants more. They need more. Government greed is insatiable. They're actually going to, in this fall economic statement, increase spending by $6 billion. $6 billion just this year. And on top of that, depending on how you calculate over the next 5 years, there may be an additional $23 to $53 billion over the next 5 years, right? The formula that's brought us to high inflation, high interest rates, and low economic growth is tax and spend government. And what does this fall economic statement propose? More tax and spend government. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. Yet that is the path that this government has chosen to continue on. And that's why given the fact that we are now in the 7 years of economic failures, the litany of failure statement that came out this fall, perhaps we do want to pause and actually study it and do our jobs and to go by the appropriate process, which is to have it debated in the House, have hopefully a debate that is both engaging while civil, that calls out different provisions that perhaps can improve this document. I myself have been in the House just on the initial introduction and heard many interesting comments. And I'll say, even though the NDP have, of course, sworn their allegiance, if you listen to their speech, you would never know that. There were actually some quite brutal critiques of the fall economic statement by the NDP, despite the fact that they are going to vote for it. Because I think they know, as we certainly recognize, that people are suffering, that it's a real affordability crisis. And when I go to my local grocery store, or I stop at a local cattle auction, or go down the street to the local Tim Hortons, or even just listening to the radio as I drive into Ottawa, I do not hear people clamoring for the capitalization of our corporations that'll come from a 2% tax on share buybacks. I do hear people struggling to pay for their Disney Plus subscriptions, but evidently the deputy leader says that they should just simply cancel that. the deputy leader must not have been around children and seen the benefit of a Disney Plus video as the challenges of parenting went through COVID-19 and beyond. And so when we look at the fall economic statement, we have that. We just don't have many measures that affect that really will impact Canadians going forward and address this affordability crisis. A couple of things that we could have seen that would have been extremely helpful would have been a reduction, a pause, or even elimination of the carbon tax. The carbon tax, of course, raises the cost of everything. And this is by design, and this is why the Liberals can't back off of this ledge that they're on, because it's their sort of principal, it's their principal policy, what they can accomplishment of 7 years. That and maybe the legalization of pot is the two things that they can point to. And the fact is that the carbon tax is having a dramatic a cause. Now, we all agree, and I'm on the record many, many times to say this, despite people spreading misinformation about us otherwise, but I'm very clear that I believe that climate change is real, and it is a real threat. What I don't believe, and actually what the Commissioner of the Environment said at Public Accounts when I was there, is that it has had an impact on us achieving our emission targets. And in fact, we have not hit one target amendment, right? We can't just simply tax our way out of to economic growth, and we can't simply tax our way out of climate change. It just doesn't work that way, because the reality is what the carbon tax is designed to do is it's designed to incent people to have behaviors that reduce their carbon input. But the reality is that some of these behaviors, they just can't be changed. Like the government likes to say that, likes to demonize polluters. Well, the reality is that the way this carbon tax works, they don't attack the big corporations with this. They attack the little guys. They attack the single moms trying to get their kids to school. They attack the farmer trying to grow their fields. They attack all the hard-working Canadians who are just trying to do their job. And quite frankly, for someone earning $30,000 a year, buying a $100,000 Tesla, like some of the members of the Parliament drive that I've seen around here, just is not an option for them, right? Today's equivalent of let them eat cake is let them buy an electric car. It is just simply not affordable for many Canadians. So even if you were a diehard believer in the carbon tax, and the carbon tax will get us to where we end, just a little bit of acknowledgement, just a little bit of less being tone deaf to where we are in the economy, a little bit of pragmatism, a little bit of step away from ideology would say, okay, well, you know what, gas prices are already going through the roof. So the idea behind the carbon tax is to send a price signal to buy other things. Well, you know what, the market has already done that. This government's failure to explore, to make use of our natural oil and gas resources has already done that. Mm-hmm. We don't really need to add insult to injury. The price signal is high enough. Ask any of my constituents. You know, at $2 a liter, that point signal, that signal has gotten across. So, so maybe even just moderating a little bit and saying, okay, let's give a pause, just a pause. And, you know, once prices go down, we need to keep that price signal up. We need to make sure that gas, groceries, and home heating continue to stay high, because that's evidently the objective of the Liberal government. But right now, it's already high enough. Let's give Canadians a break on that price signal that is driving Canadians literally to not be able to eat this winter, to not be able to heat their homes. Many Canadians heat with oil, not because I'm sure they'd love to install, many Canadians, a geothermal heat pump, but that costs tens of thousands of dollars. And for someone earning $60,000, $70,000 a year, knowing that half of that is going to the government, then they're paying their mortgage, which the interest rates have just gone up. They don't have money to get to the end of the month, much less embark on investing in a home renovation that can cost, I believe, $40,000 or $50,000 to get a geothermal, or to invest in solar panels on their house to help them heat their home that way. They just simply do not have the money. Canadians can only give so much money to these Liberals. They just keep asking for more and for more and for more and for more. And they're just absolutely relentless in that demand, insatiable need for money. The greed is just, it's palpable. Another way that they could have given Canadians a break in the fall economic statement would be to reduce the payroll tax. And one of the bits of misinformation that unfortunately float around out there is that somehow by reducing the payroll taxes, that would reduce EI benefits or it would reduce the CPP. That's not true. The reality is it's actually overfunded, and that a portion of that's already going to general coffers, which is just going to feed liberal greed. The liberal greed, the fever for more and more money, what we've seen is we've seen payroll taxes increase year after year. In fact, over the 7 years, someone earning the massive amount of money of $65,000 a year have seen a payroll tax increase of $750. And just overall, I'm troubled by this government's belief that the money should go to Ottawa and then come back to Canadians. So whether it be through their planned carbon tax rebate for farmers, their various other rebate programs, step one is always having that money come to Ottawa. The belief, you know what, we saw it back in the Martin days. They honestly believe that Canadians, if given control over their own money, they'd spend it on beer and popcorns. And we've seen that again with the deputy leader. This is the latest incarnation of it with the Disney Plus, right? The reality is I would trust any one of my constituents over anyone in Ottawa to spend their money. People in my riding, Canadians across this land, are more than capable of handling and spending their own money. They don't need it to go to Ottawa because you know what happens sometimes, Mr. Chair? You wouldn't believe this. The money comes to Ottawa and it stays here, and it doesn't go back out to the people. We've heard Liberal after Liberal say to Canadians that the carbon tax is revenue neutral. Simply not true. 10% of it stays with government, and even the 90% is very unbalanced, in fact, where it goes out. So my riding of Northumberland, Peterborough South, the people in Cobourg and Port Hope, and also even more so the people in Crammy and Campbellford and Brighton, they don't have access to the public transport that many individuals and many other ridings would have. And so they quite frankly have no other option. So that price signal that's meant to drive them to find a less carbon intensive alternative actually has the opposite impact on them because they're already struggling to get by. And so while maybe electric vehicle might have been possible for them if they had saved all their penny, continued to work hard and make great decisions, but the government taking an extra $750 in payroll on someone who's just making $65,000 a year, the government taking the carbon tax and tripling the carbon tax, the government, just the tax rates are unbelievable. And we're also facing, of course, a labor shortage. And so what's this government's response? Well, we're going to disincentivize work. So if we have someone, if it's particularly a senior who's receiving GIS, they're going to face a dollar-for-dollar clawback on their GIS. On top of that, once they earn the huge amount of $14,000, they're going to start paying income tax. In addition to that, they're paying GST. Granted, they'll get some of that back in the rebate. They'll pay property tax, and they'll say they'll pay provincial sales tax. They'll pay provincial income tax. They'll say, well, that's not federal. Well, that's not the way most Canadians see that. They see the government as one entity, and the government continues to take more and more. And I'll say this part, at least in my province of Ontario, the Ford government has been willing to reduce or pause the gas tax. So, you know, if you won't reduce the carbon tax, you won't even pause the carbon tax, how about we just do this? Why don't we just do what we've both been calling for, both the two of the largest opposition parties in the NDP and the Conservative Party? Let's eliminate the GST. Let's eliminate the GST on gasoline and on home heating oil, because the GST is driving up the cost of home heating and of fuel. And unlike the carbon tax, as my NDP colleagues will point out, it affects people from coast to coast to coast. And so by removing the HST, or at least on a temporary basis, you could reduce that. Do you know that there's no other country in the G7 that hasn't reduced fuel taxes in some way or some sort? We are the only outlier out there. And it's like I said, government revenues, well, they overfloweth because of inflation. They're literally taking money. And you know where that money comes from is the wealthy in our society. They've seen their $1 million houses go up to worth $2 million. They've seen, in some cases, they've seen their stocks appreciate in value. But now that's even coming down. But who's really hurt it are people at the most vulnerable in our community, seniors on fixed incomes, those at the lower end of the economic spectrum, because if in fact you're earning $200,000 a year and you see your costs go up by 10%, that's not a good thing, but it doesn't. You still get to eat. If you're earning $30,000 a year and you've seen your cost of living go up by 10%, that very well means that you're watering down your children's milk, that you're going to a food bank. As in 1 month, alone in Canada, we saw 1.5 million Canadians go to the food bank. That's a staggering number. A third of which were children. That's 500,000 children in 1 month. In 1 year, 500,000 children went to food banks. It's the inflation beast. It's the elephant in the room that the fall economic statement that fails to address. In fact, in their projection, it has it magically decreasing to 3.5%. There's no rhyme or reason or explanation of why it reduces, other than it makes their numbers look better. But what if inflation continues to increase? That combined with 2 quarters of economic decline, which actually it calls for on the downside, is something called stagflation. Do you know when the last time we had stagflation was? That's when Pierre Elliott Trudeau was prime minister. When he brought us up, he invented this term, or he created this term. Him and Jimmy Carter created these left-leaning policies. They lead to the same thing over and over and over again. You cannot tax and spend yourself to prosperity. It just doesn't work that way. In fact, the great Winston Churchill referred to taxing yourself into prosperity being the same as stepping in a bucket and then grabbing the handle and trying to pull yourself up by the bucket. It just doesn't work that way. So what else would we have liked to see in the fall economic statement? Well, they're projecting like I said, a potential recession. So you would expect something in there to encourage economic growth. I continue not to see anything that inspires us for economic growth. Economic growth is the magic elixir that will heal many economic problems. When we have strong economic growth, we are able to cover over many of our other economic issues and other challenges. And so you would expect if the government's saying, hey, you know what? Guys, caution, red light ahead, yellow light ahead. We've got a potential recession coming, which in their downside projection they predict. Interesting, on their normal projection, or their I guess what they would expected projection, they have 1 quarter in negative and 1 quarter in 0.0. That's almost like they were sort of hedging their homework there a little bit, Mr. Chair, just so in their main projection they didn't call for a recession. It's kind of funny. It wasn't 0.1, it wasn't minus 0.1, it wasn't minus 0.2, it was 0. The lowest you could possibly get in a projection without projecting a recession, which is a little bit interesting. But getting back to my point, with respect to economic growth, is that if in fact this statement is correct and the projections are correct, and many of the private sector economists have said much the same, that we can expect an economic slowdown, if not a full-on recession, you would expect to see an economic growth. So from our side of the table, what you might expect would be some targeted tax cuts, some targeted tax relief to inspire business owners to take risks, to invest in the economy, to sort of buffer this result. So sort of the Keynesian philosophy, right? If you know you're coming into a recession, you reduce taxes. Now, from my friends down to the left of me, they would no doubt call on greater spending to buffer against this future economic loss or this future economic slowdown. But we didn't really see any of this, right? And they said, it was such a strange contradiction to see the NDP speeches on this, condemning it, saying it's terrible, and then coming out immediately and saying that they're going to vote for it. It just was such an odd contradiction, and I'm sure that their caucus meetings are pretty interesting, given the fact that their voting is there's such a dissonance between their voting and their comments, both public and otherwise. So, I mean, maybe one of the things that we could work on in this committee is working to, if the NDP are serious about it, is pausing the GST on fuel and home heating. That perhaps if they were serious about helping Canadians, maybe they would join us in doing that. But as I've said, and I'll continue to talk about for as long as I have to, the reality is that Conservatives will stand up for the principles of democracy, accountability, and transparency, and we simply won't rubber stamp legislation because of this government. And we would do this regardless because my obligation is not to any member of this committee, not to the Liberal government, not even to my party. It's to Canadians. And Canadians sent me here. The people of Northumberland, Peterborough South, sent me here not just to rubber stamp legislation, but to do my job. Follow the parliamentary procedure, make sure that we have a hearing, a discussion. Like, these are billions of dollars, right? So to come out and say, November 30th, no matter what, we're going forward. That's not how democracy works. Maybe in some governments in this world, that would pass muster, but not here in Canada, not with the Conservatives as the official opposition. So we'll continue to hold this Liberal government to account. And with that, I'll take a brief respite in my remarks here.
MP Lawrence, I've got now MP Morantz, MP Blakey, MP Zerowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I first saw that this motion had come up for consideration, it was quite confusing. I am part of the class of 2019, so I spent, and half of that time or close to it, I spent zooming in. And but from my understanding, from the time I have been here, legislation has a process that it follows. It gets introduced, it gets debated in the House, and then it gets voted on to go to committee. Now, I guess the trouble I'm having with this motion is the fact that we have not, in the House, voted to send this Bill C-32 to committee. So I'm not quite sure why we're having this motion. In fact, it is somewhat offensive in this sense, is that Canadians have voted in two elections, one in 2019 and the unnecessary election in 2021 that both brought forward minority parliaments, and they voted. Both those elections cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and they sent us here to consider legislation. And so I think they'd have a lot of trouble understanding why this committee would presuppose that C-32 would actually pass the House. And I think that's the underlying message of this motion. You're asking the committee to study something which has not been sent to committee by the House. So I find it quite unusual and out of proper, not following proper process to try and bring this motion to committee before a vote's taken place. And so I want to give a real-life example of this. Many of you are familiar with my private member's bill, Bill C-256. Many of the Liberals are. I spoke to many of them. Some of them are here today in this committee meeting about Bill C-256. So Bill C-256 was what was called the Supporting Canadian Charities Act. And it was designed to build on existing law that would give a waiver of the capital gains tax to private shares in real estate, similarly to what currently goes on with publicly traded securities. So now, for example, if you want to make a contribution of your publicly traded stock to, in the Winnipeg context, say the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, you can do that. You'll get a tax receipt for the full amount of the contribution, and you will get a waiver of your capital gains tax. That's been the law of the land for over 20 years. My bill wanted to expand that to the sale proceeds of private shares and real estate. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up is that I went through all the proper processes. I had the bill drafted. I introduced it into the House. We had our first hour of debate. We had our second hour of debate. I spent months and months and months talking to colleagues in all parties of this House, from the Green Party to the NDP to the Bloc to the Liberals, trying to gather support for this bill. I did all the things that we are supposed to do as legislators to bring my legislation forward. And then after the second hour of debate, it was brought up for a vote. And I'm not, this is not sour grapes. This is fair enough. I accept the will of Parliament. But Parliament did not vote to send Bill C-256 to committee. And in fact, it would have come to this committee had it passed. And so looking back on it now, if this is the way things are to be, the next time I bring up a private member's bill, I'm going to bring a motion to the Finance Committee every time, and I would encourage every member to do that. Just bring a motion and have it considered by committee before the House even votes on it. Why bother with inconveniences like a vote in the House of Commons? Let's just skip that step altogether and bring it to committee and consider it here. What would have happened, I wonder, if I had done that and this committee had agreed to hear Bill C-256 before the vote in the House? What if we had agreed to have a study about it? And we had spent weeks doing clause by clause, hearing from witnesses from the various charities across the country, hearing from tax accountants who could give us advice on the bill, hearing from the public service who could give us advice on the bill. What if we had done that in advance of the vote in the House? You know what would have happened, Mr. Chair? We would have wasted a pile of time. I don't think the underlying flaw with this motion, Mr. Beach's motion, is that it presupposes the will of Parliament. It's asking to study a piece of legislation that we have not voted to send to committee. And that is a fundamental flaw. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about some of my experience on this committee, because some of you may remember I was on this committee in my first year here, and then I went over to the Foreign Affairs Committee. But the year I was there, we actually were able to talk to the governors of the banks. The outgoing governor, Mr. Pelaez, was here, and the incoming governor, Mr. Macklem, was here. This was in May and June of 2020, and I had rounds with both of them. And the funny thing is, I look back on those rounds quite often now because they were very interesting. So the round with Mr. Governor Pelaez went something like this. Don't you think that this program of quantitative easing that you've engaged in, of increasing the money supply, might trigger inflation, and that inflation might trigger an increase in interest rates? I gave him historical examples. For example, what happened in the Weimar Republic after World War I, when the government of Germany started printing money in order to fund war reparations, and hyperinflation took hold, in fact. And people were literally going to the markets with wheelbarrows full of cash, not knowing how much things were going to cost. You know what Mr. Pelaez said? His response was, whether it would cause inflation or interest rate hikes, he said, no. We're in such a deep hole right now. What parliamentarians should be concerned about is deflation. That would be the worst thing that could happen. We're not going to have inflation. Interest rates, if they go up one day, that would be a nice problem to have. You guys go back and you look at that tape. That's exactly what he said. it's a very interesting conversation. And you know what? A month later, Governor Macklem came. And I asked him the same thing. I said, don't you think that this program of quantitative easing that you've embarked on is going to have some effect? Don't you think that increasing the money supply from $1.8 trillion to $2.3 trillion, almost 25%, might have an effect on the cost of goods in our economy? Well, you know what he said? He said, no, 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 no. We're in such a deep hole. We're not worried about inflation. That's not going to happen. We're not worried about interest rates going up. You know, if interest rates go up, maybe they will, but that would be a good problem to have. These guys both said that. So now we have, fast forward to today, where interest rates are, have gone up from the basis point of 0.25% overnight rate to 3.75 in about 6 months. People's mortgage payments have quadrupled on top of the tripling of the carbon tax. Now people's mortgage payments are literally quadrupling almost overnight. Now fast forward to today. What are these same folks saying? Now we have Mark Carney saying he thinks that the government, Bank of Canada, went too far and that they should have curtailed their quantitative easing program sooner. We have Deputy Governor Beaudry, who is at the bank as we speak, saying similar things, and even Governor Macklem is saying these things now. So it is quite concerning that this is all gone on. And I'll just add one other thing. I want to talk about Prime Minister Paul Martin for a second. When Paul Martin was, before he was Prime Minister, when he was Finance Minister, he brought down in 1995 what was the most draconian budget in the history of this country. And if you aren't familiar with it, I would urge you to go back in time and read about it. What he did was he cut transfer payments. He cut transfers to provinces for health and education. Can you imagine a government today trying to do that? He did it. Why did he do it? That's a rhetorical question because I have the floor. So please don't answer it. But why did he do it? Why did he cut transfers to provinces? Did he just wake up in the morning and think, well, this would be a good idea. Maybe we'll balance the budget a little quicker. Did he do it because he wanted to? Well, no, I think we know he didn't do it because he wanted to. He did it because he was forced to. Why was he forced to? Well, because big government spending had forced up interest rates in the 1990s to 6 or 7%. Debt service had become a massive proportion of government. Does any of this sound familiar? Don't answer that. That's a rhetorical question as well. Government deficits, debts had grown, interest rates had gone up. Debt servicing was a massive part of the government's financial obligations, just like it's becoming now. I think the conservative estimate, which I think comes out of the fall economic update, is that the next year the debt service will be $40 billion, up from $23 billion, almost doubled, and almost as much as the health transfer. But that's not exactly why he did it. You know why he did it? He was forced to. He was forced to because the bond rating agencies downgraded Canada. The Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or one of those papers called Canada an economic basket case, like on the verge of being third world status, which was the terminology they used back in that day. So, Paul Martin didn't do it because he wanted to, that it made him happy to do it. He did it because he was forced to. And I worry a lot, and I've talked about this before in my speeches in the House, that we're heading down a similar path. I cautioned about it in the past. My cautions, because I lived through the years of high interest rates. Mr. Chair, when I bought my first, I'll go off topic for a second, just if you bear with me. When I bought my first place back in 1989 in Winnipeg, it was a condo in Osborne Village, cost $86,000. I had a $75,000 mortgage, with a bank, TD Bank, in fact. You know what my interest rate was? It was 12.75%. It was a first mortgage. And that, that was a good rate. That was a very good rate to get. I was lucky to get it. We are heading down a very, very dangerous path. And this statement does the two things that are going to make it even worse. It's just bad medicine. It's bad medicine for the economy. What are those two things? They're increasing spending by at least $20 billion over the next 5 years, and they're increasing taxes. They're increasing taxes on Canadians through the paycheck taxes. They're my pet peeve is the excise tax. They're actually want to charge more, 6 or 7% more for a beer. It's sacrilege in Canada. Leave the beer alone. Let people have their beer. But that's what they want to do. That's what they think that's the solution. And then now they want to tax share buybacks. And you know what I find interesting about that is that when they brought in the TOSI rules, one of the things they changed was they said, if you're going to keep income in your company that you're not using for business purposes, what they called passive income, we're going to increase the tax rate to your nominal tax rate, and essentially what you would pay if it was considered to be personal income. So the interest you earned or the dividends you earned on the passive income inside a company, that was going to be taxed at a higher rate. And why did they do that? Because they wanted that money out of the company and in the economy doing something. That was the tax policy reason for it. And so business people all over the country, they started to shed their passive investments and remove it from their companies so that they could reduce the tax burden that the government had suddenly imposed on them. And I say suddenly because that's exactly what happened. There was no consultation around that at all. So, but now fast forward to 3 years later, and they bring in a policy, ironically, that's designed to do the exact opposite when it comes to publicly traded companies. The purpose of the 2% tax on the share buybacks is to force companies to keep their passive income inside their companies. So, the companies, whether they're privately held or publicly held, are not being treated the same. You're saying to privately held Canadian corporations, well, no, you can't have passive income in your company. You're going to pay a penalty for that. Mm-hmm. They say to publicly traded companies, no, you got to keep that money in your company because you might need it to expand your operations. Well, government shouldn't be telling publicly traded companies what they need to spend their money on. That is an intrusion of the state that should never, ever happen. These companies should be able to decide on their own whether they need that capital in their company or not. But that's a whole other story. So I am disappointed would be a kind word to express about this fall economic update. But more than that, the underlying procedural unfairness of this motion to presuppose the will of the House, to assume that the NDP is actually going to vote with the government when it comes up for a vote on second reading. They haven't stood up and done that yet. They might not. Maybe some of them will finally see the light and realize that the errors of their ways and that they've gone down the wrong path with this government finally. But the fact of the matter is we don't know. This motion assumes that is in fact the case, and that's just wrong. It's wrong. But if this motion actually passes, I'm going to be doing this all the time. I'm going to bring motions on my private member's bill. I think we should all consider bringing motions on bills that we're interested in to have pre-studies on them before they pass the House. Why not? We're doing it here. I guess things have changed around here. So with that, I am very, very concerned about this change in process that I think can only have a deleterious effect on how we consider. By the way, it also presupposes that when we're debating a bill in the House, it doesn't matter. I hear that all too often with time allocation. Time after time after time, the government cuts off debate in the House, thinking, well, those MPs, they couldn't possibly have anything useful to say. Let's get it to committee where we can have a real talk discussion about it. It doesn't matter. Why do we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on this place? Why are we spending billions of dollars renovating the West Block when time after time after time the Liberal government basically says it doesn't matter? It doesn't matter. MPs don't need to speak in the House on this. Let's send it to committee before it even passes, before you even know what the will of elected officials are. Let's send it to committee, before the votes even happen. That's just not right. So with that, I think I made my point, but I'm going to cede my time and the floor at this point, Mr. Chair. But I would ask to be put back on the speaking list just because I may have other important revelations that will be of the utmost importance for consideration here at this committee today.
Okay, merci, MP Morantz. And now we have MP Blakey, MP Zerowitz, MP Wagenthal, and then MP Lawrence. MP Blakey.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Chair. And I want to come back to the issue at hand, which is how the committee is going to conduct its business over the next several weeks. But I thought I might start just by sharing some observations about things that have been said around the table today. I noted one member in particular expressed concern about wasting time. And I'm wondering if people that are watching at home or who will consult the record at some point in the future will feel that we've done a good job of taking to heart any meaningful concern about wasting time. It was my frustration at the end of last meeting that we didn't come up with a plan for what to do at this meeting, and it's an ongoing frustration that we're sitting around the table blowing off steam, which is not an illegitimate thing to do around Parliament Hill, but it has its time and its place. And I'd rather be blowing off steam in the context of a productive study of something and not a kind of open-ended conversation about what we're going to put on the agenda for subsequent meetings, because it seems to me that that is not the level at which we should have intractable dispute around this table. So I'll start just by signaling that and saying that I'm anxious for us to come to some kind of conclusion on what the path forward is going to be for the committee, because I think we'll be doing more productive work, which will include an exploration of many of the same questions that members have been exploring here today, if we're doing it in the context of a proper study. I know some members said that the legislation isn't out of the House. That's certainly true. They say they don't feel ready to undertake a study. I would say, given the number of comments made about the content of the Fall Economic Statement and the legislation that's already been tabled in the House, it seems to me members around this table are in a pretty good position to start talking about the content of the bill. In fact, they are talking about the content of the bill. My question is, why can't we just do that in the context of a study of the bill? And then it would actually count towards our formal study and the conclusions that we will ultimately draw, whatever they may be, about the legislation. We could be doing that. And not only could we be doing that in the context of a formal study, but we could do that with the benefit of having other people at the table than just ourselves, whether those are finance officials or whether they're stakeholders from Canadian society who have legitimate concern about the content of the bill. I think we would be having a better conversation if their input was part and parcel of what we were doing here today. And it could have been if we had come to some kind of agreement sooner about how we wanted to proceed with the study of the bill. I accept the frustration that certain members have about the idea of a pre-study. I don't think it's a great habit, but I will say, in my experience around this table in this Parliament, we have often been short on time. And it has often been a complaint later by the same folks who exhibit reticence to have pre-studies that we don't have enough time for fulsome study. Just so that there aren't any misconceptions, I'm talking specifically about the Conservatives here, who don't let debate collapse on certain bills. And then when it comes to committee, we engage in these kinds of long drawn-out conversations about what we're going to study or whether we're going to study it or whatever. And then there's usually certain deadlines. And I would say particularly when it comes to government legislation around a budget or a fall economic statement, there's market-moving things in those bills that are going to have real consequences. I would say in the case of this bill, we're talking about the pandemic dividend. and an increase in the corporate tax rate for financial institutions, and the elimination of interest on student loans. Those are things that ought to be in place for the next tax year, and there's a limited amount of time. We're beginning a 5-week clock within which that legislation has to be passed, or it won't be in place for the following year. Not only will it not be in place for January 1st of the following year, but it won't be in place until well into the next year, because Parliament won't sit until the first Monday in January. That's where it'll start up again. So there is a reasonable time frame there. I think that it behooves committee members to be concerned about. And that means certain things for the passage of the bill through committee, and so it makes sense for us to start studying it now. A little procedural advice for members around the table. It's impossible to amend the content of a bill at second reading, so the concern that somehow the bill could change not only radically, but even just minutely, is unfounded. So I hope that members will receive that as information about parliamentary process. There are 3 types of amendments that you can move at second reading. You can have a hoist amendment, you can have a reasoned amendment, and you can have a motion of instruction to committee. Those are the 3 kinds. None of them change the content of the bill, which was previewed in the Ways and Means motion on the Friday following the economic statement. And members who aren't sure where the NDP stands on that will know that we voted in favor of that Ways and Means motion, which contained an almost identical version of the bill. You have to get approval of the Ways and Means motion in order to be able to table the legislation. We voted for the Ways and Means motion. It contained substantially the content of the legislation. Members can expect that that legislation will find its way to this committee table one way or the other with the support of the NDP. To certain members, that appears to be a contradiction. I don't think so at all. It is not a contradiction to support things that you don't think go far enough, that don't contain things that if you had your own druthers would be in there, but because you think there are other good reasons to support it. Because there are some things we're supporting in there. The Democrats support the share buyback. We support the pandemic dividend. In fact, that's one of the items that was in the supply and confidence agreement, because we felt that it was very important that financial institutions that benefited substantially from public funds during the pandemic, something that the Conservative leader loves to talk about, should be made to pay some of that money back. And that's what the pandemic dividend is about. And I've been shocked, frankly, at the silence of the Conservative leader on an initiative that is meant to take that very same public money he likes to complain about out of the pockets of financial institutions and deliver it back to Canadians. Not so that it can go to government largesse, and there are real concerns about largesse when it comes to this government, but so that it can go to fund things like the GST rebate that had all party support, I might add, something that New Democrats were fighting for a long time, something that wasn't clear when Bill C-30 was initially tabled, Conservatives would support, and you finally did, and I appreciate that. That was a good thing. But we also believe that you have to have money to pay for it. I hear Conservatives talk about government getting a lot of money and government largesse. Other times they talk about the fact that government still has a large deficit and a huge debt. Well, where do you think paying down the deficit is going to come from if it ain't going to come from revenue? So when we're talking about things like a pandemic dividend that directly target the people that got away with more money than they should have in order to bring it back into government coffers that don't have a balanced budget, that's called tackling a problem. It's not called largesse. It's not called socialism. It's not called whatever other kinds of propagandist terms people would like to use. It's good policy, and it's about actually figuring out a way to solve the problem instead of trying to complain your way into government without actually proposing any real solutions. So that's why we're willing to support this legislation, because we think there are things in there that will actually make a difference, and we recognize that that support has to be timely in order for it to make a difference to Canadians, which is why I'm willing to put aside my normal reservations about pre-studies and get on with it, because I'd like to hear from other people across the country what they think about that legislation and see if there are opportunities to make it better with enough time to actually make it better, instead of just complaining more about how we didn't have time to make it better. And that's a responsibility of members at this committee in order to be able to get on with it. And with all due respect, it's not the same as private members' bills, which are important, and that, you know, I support a lot of the private members' business that comes to this table. But it's not like because we're going to engage in a pre-study for a major government bill that involves one of their two basic financial documents for the year, that all of a sudden Pandora's box is going to get opened up and we should be pre-studying every piece of legislation that comes through the House. It's a different kind of bill with a different kind of consequence and a different kind of timetable. So that's why I'm prepared to support a pre-study at the table. I'm also prepared to do it in a way that offers Conservatives some of what they said they want around this table, including a prompt return to the study of Bill 241 after we've concluded this business, because I do think it's important that this table take private members' business seriously and that it do it in the right way. So I'm happy to add that to the mix. If it means we can get some agreement, I think that would be a very good thing. I also note that Conservatives have a motion which may not yet be formally on notice, but it's been talked about at this table in respect of inviting the finance minister again and the governor of the Bank of Canada. I've expressed my willingness to support that. I think that's a good thing. But this meeting is a meeting where we could have been doing some of that stuff. And I am frustrated that we're having another meeting where we're all chit-chatting about the many things we'd like to do around this table and not doing any of it. So let's figure out how we move forward. If there's a way to include in the motion returning promptly to 241, if there's a way to have an agreement that will deal promptly with the motion that the Conservative finance critic has put forward at some point and then schedule a time to deal with that, that's great. But let's create a package that allows us to have a plan for the next 9 meetings that we have between now and Christmas. So we're actually doing work and we're getting these things done. There is enough time for people to get enough things done that matter to them that I think we can work this out. But we're going to have to do better than we've done today, or we're going to burn another meeting on Wednesday, and all the more the shame. And it'll be hard to take people seriously when they're complaining about how fast things are moving and how little time they've had when we burned up 2 meetings talking about how to schedule meetings. It's ridiculous. So that's where I'm at. Those are standing offers. I hope that people around the table will take me up on them and that we'll find a resolution today so that we can do real work on Wednesday. Because I tell you, if I show up Wednesday and we're doing more of this, my mood is going to continue to degenerate. And it ain't going to be fun. Not for me and not for anybody else.
Thank you, MP Blakey. MP Zarowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say I agree with literally just about everything that Mr. Blakey just said. I would rather be spending this meeting actually hearing from witnesses about the fall economic statement. I absolutely agree that we always are on a shortage of time in this House. And so we always have to really think about how we're spending our time. So I want to say a huge thanks to Mr. Blakey for putting forward his thoughts. This isn't for me to stroke his ego or anything. I genuinely appreciate your comments. I'll be making a few comments as well. And if people feel that we could take a break for a few minutes and maybe try to find some sort of resolution, I would love to do that. But I'm going to start off first by agreeing that we put forward a serious fall economic statement. My colleague, Yvonne Baker, has mentioned a number of things that's included in it, whether it's around the student loans or additional initiatives helping Canadians to buy their first home or paying the Canada Worker Benefit more frequently. I'm also a very big supporter of the 2% tax on share buybacks. Our business investment in Canada is abysmal. It's about 50% of where the US is at. CD Howe has written about this. They've literally screaming from the top of their lungs to say we have to do more to encourage business investment. And 10 years at a historic low interest rates has not produced more investment in research and innovation, and it's done nothing for wage increases across this country. And so the fall economic statement has proposed some good measures, and I think that deserves a hearing and a consideration, a serious one. And I'll put one other thing that's really important for me is immigration levels. There is a section in the fall economic statement where it says the following: to support the processing and settlement of new permanent residents to Canada as part of the 2023 to 25 immigration levels plan. The government's committed 1.6 billion over 6 years and 350 million ongoing in new funding. And I'll tell you, we have a massive labor shortage. I know that we're all talking about slowing down of economy. This isn't just happening in Canada, this is happening around the world. But I'll tell you, I was listening to a few economists and they were saying that 10 years ago, we would have 1 in 7 retirees, so 7 workers for every 1 retiree. We are now down to 1 retiree for every 3 workers. If we want to continue to have a healthy social welfare system in this country, childcare, healthcare, EI, pensions, we need to make sure that we are replenishing our workforce, and additional dollars for immigration is a key part of that strategy and an important one, an important segment of the fall economic statement. I also agree with what Mr. Blakey has said. While it is not it's not something that I think we should get used to. And my understanding is last year, at around this time in 2021, and I was on the finance committee then, we did exactly the same thing that we're doing right now. We we voted on the Ways and Means motion for the fall economic statement. We started with the pre-studies. And it was something because at that time the Conservatives had encouraged us and said that they wanted to hear from witnesses as soon as possible, and that's exactly what we want to do right now. There's no desire to circumvent any process, to not be transparent, to do any bait and switch or not follow some sort of a democratic process. We're short on time. We are very anxious to try to get as many supports out to Canadians as soon as possible. We've just given 11 million Canadians doubling of their GST. We are trying to, finalize, and hopefully Senate will do it soon, the dental care benefit, as well as the housing benefit. And then hopefully there'll be some additional, so hopefully the fall economic statement will pass and there'll be additional supports for Canadians. And we know life is tough for Canadians right now. We know they need these additional supports. These are targeted, measured, smart supports that have been suggested in the fall economic statement. And the only way that we can know whether or not these are good ideas, whether this is a good plan, is if we could get to the pre-studies, get some witnesses in, and have them provide some feedback on this. So there's a lot of other things I could do to say around some of the unfortunate comments from the Conservatives. There's been, the Liberals have supported, and I would say our government in general, from many parties, have supported the middle class right from when we were first elected in 2015, from implementing the Canada Child Benefit to lowering the taxes on the middle class, to increasing OAS, to increasing the GIS. I could go on, but there's been a number of measures, and the Conservatives every single time did not support that. We say it in the House of Commons all the time. We say it in question period all the time. It bears repeating for those that are listening here and don't usually listen to question period. I think I'll end off because I think that Mr. Blakey was mentioning that there would be, there's some openness in terms of let's get going on the pre-budget, the fall economic statement. And then there could be some consideration about moving forward around 241, as well as moving forward on hearing from our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, as well as from the bank governor. But I'd also say to you that we have pre-budget consultations that I think we also have to make sure that we are moving forward on. We do have another budget that's coming up in the spring. We have, I believe, around 700 people who have put in submissions. I know many have asked to sit before us, to stand before us, or to speak before us. And I think it's important for us to try to make sure that we find some time. That won't happen before Christmas, but that's just to say that there's a lot of things that are fighting for our time. And I 100% agree with Mr. Blakey and anyone else around the table who agrees with this, that we should just get going and find a way forward. So, Mr. Chair, that's the end of my comments for now.
Well, thank you, MP Zerowitz. And as you mentioned just at the end, just to be cognizant of time, and I know MP Blakey brought it up, we've got 45 minutes, folks, so that's what we have here. I have MP Wagenthal up now, and then MP Lawrence.
Okay, thank you so much, Chair. It's an honor to be here having this discussion with you. I have to say I'm coming at this today from the perspective of the long view of how we've focused on our speeches in the House today around extending hours, and then also the concerns around committee and serving on Veterans Affairs Standing Committee. I can tell you I'm very concerned about the time that we have available to us, knowing the very serious topics that we're discussing as well. So I would just like to say that I have a concern around this because, again, it is a change in procedure at a time when there's apprehension about how much time many committees are going to have to study the issues before them before we break for Christmas, and then, of course, coming into the new year, as the member has said. So I just want to approach this from two perspectives. First, I represent Saskatchewan as a member of Parliament, and very proud of that fact. I have to say that what I feel and hear from my constituents, and being a province with 1 million plus 100,000 people, you get a real good sense of what the whole province is thinking. There's a great deal of concern around this fall economic statement. They don't have confidence in this government because of the way that things tend to get done. And so there's apprehension, especially around the fact that things get introduced in the House in a non-timely way and quite often end up on the back burner until all of a sudden it does become this crisis situation, which to me is poor management. There isn't a business, I hear this all the time from my small, medium businesses as well as the larger corporations that are the undergirding of so many communities in the West. They say we would not be able to function like that. We're not allowed to function that way. So I have to say that what I hear is concern around the fact that, yes, this is a crisis situation, but why is it a crisis situation? They think outside that box of the desperation of the moment and think of why are we in the desperation of the moment. And so the concern is around the fact that you can only spend so much, you can only borrow so much, and at some point you can only print so much money. And that's where the apprehension is with this particular fall economic statement, and the concern that it have its due time in the House and opportunity for Canadians to listen within the House and hear members speak to it, and then to move to the committee level. I know that, well, it's important to have research, to have people who are the experts, the professionals. But then there's a third pillar that should always be there, and that is the lived experience of Canadians. And that lived experience seems to be being ignored to a huge extent. And you may say, well, we're doing all of these things to help Canadians at this moment. And I think that's the part that they struggle with. It's at this moment. It's a great deal of money, and yet when you spread it out, and in light of the fact that the housing support, it's not enough to even give them a couple of weeks sleep. People are staying awake at night. It's causing all kinds of issues. I know within my riding, not being able to afford the things that they need to do the very basic needs to meet their families' concerns in even feeding them. I have elderly people who heat their home with oil and have now been told not only that the price of that is going up, but their container is a decade old, therefore they must replace it. And they said, this has come federally. I'm going to check into that because it's $5,000. And they're not in a place to do that right now in light of everything. And that's why we have tried so hard to convince this government that Canadians are saying enough already. We need a pause. We need a break. And I will speak here not so much as a member of Parliament, but as an individual Canadian, in that when I heard the worst inflation in 40 years, that sent a shudder through my being, because I was there and experienced with my husband what it was like to suddenly go from a profitable business into its 5th year of existence to being decimated, basically decimated by interest rates that reached 22%, and a house that we could not afford and could not sell, and a family of 3 small children. All of these dynamics are what people are beginning to experience again now. And so I really feel that it's important that we step back here and, yes, get the committee to do the proper study, but where I hear all the time from Canadians in my riding is these announcements are made, even with the COVID program. It's out on the website, but then there's no meat to it yet. So why are we bringing this forward if there are, I don't have confidence that the government has said, okay, we're going to do this, and then looked at the dynamics of what that will mean beyond the moment into the longer picture, because we are in a situation now where already before COVID hit, investment in our country was leaking all over the place. I come from a province that is incredibly capable, that has all kinds of wonderful industries that are environmentally aware and conscious and doing good things. There isn't a part of our province that isn't making a difference in this country. And of course, it's crucial that we recognize the capabilities of our country to do what government can't do, and that is build an economy the way it needs to be built. Just do what you need to do to assist, especially as one member said in regard to providing those social assistance and our national defense. These are all things that are federal, but to be interfering in the way that it has been being done with the economic strength of our country. I was able to sit on industry the other day as they discussed a private member's bill coming forward. It's called Greening the Prairies. I would like to invite you all to come to my province and say those words in front of anyone who works in our industries and our agriculture, because there is not a place in this nation that is more conscientious and doing more all the time to green the prairies. And so these are the kinds of disconnections that I'm experiencing and hearing, and I think it's important, as I said, that we do things in the proper way, and that is get this, get the discussion in the House, have opportunity to get out, and actually I'd welcome you all to come to the prairies and find out where the wealth of this nation is. I jest in saying sometimes that, yes, the weight of a riding should be based, yes, on population and on what they contribute to the GDP. Of course, that's never going to happen, but we all know that if this country doesn't have what it needs to create the budgets that this government truly needs, rather than to be doing Band-Aid solutions that are important, I have to think of, I know of people in my riding, you could compare it to the difference between making a loaf of bread themselves or having a sandwich that they know they've got, and then someone saying, would you like a crust as well? And of course you're going to take it. And that's the circumstances that I feel a lot of what's in this this fall economic statement is doing, in ways that it's not going to help in the long term. I want to see what we're going to do to make the difference. And I think I know what that is. I've certainly heard a couple of great speeches from my side of the floor from a certain leader that I think is really encouraging Canadians and giving them hope. So that's all I have to say at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Wegenthal. I have MP Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And so I did want to discuss further with on the challenges with respect to this piece of legislation. But before we do, I do just want to go over a bit of process. And yeah, certainly a government can't amend at second, but they can pull off the legislation, which has happened numerous times since Confederation, where a government pulls their legislation and reintroduces it prior to a vote, and that's happened numerous times. And so, my apologies for any loose language there. I am fully aware of how Parliament works, but I would also point to the fact that it was because Parliament didn't review it in depth as they should have, that the deferred prosecution for SNC-Lavalin got through. And that was a failure of Parliament. And so, while I certainly understand and certainly believe that everyone has the best interests of Canadians at heart, I won't back down 1 second, no matter who it irritates or angers, in doing what I believe is right for my people of Northumberland, Peterborough South, and that is to review this legislation. And so talking is part of democracy. And in fact, Parliament is literally a translation of talking house. That's what it means. And so Parliament, what differentiates us from many other countries in the world is that we have the ability at committee in Parliament to share that. And in fact, the NDP, numerous times when Prime Minister Harper was in charge, railed against time allocation as the greatest offense to democracy man had ever known. And members of this very committee have done that. And I'd love to grab their speeches and go over them, and I could read them word for word because they apply exactly today. And on a day when we brought Motion 22, which is to no doubt in a way to circumvent democracy, I will proudly stand up here and I will talk for as long as I have to stop this government's reckless spending. It's been proven over and over and over again that when a government taxes itself and taxes Canadians and taxes people of the world, it eventually leads to an equality of poverty. Everyone is poorer. It is the workers. It is the people that go to work every day that are the economic engine. It is not. This is no slight whatsoever to our bureaucracy. We have many great women and men working every day, but it is the farmers in Saskatchewan. It is the miners in northern Ontario. It is the fishers in the east coast and west coast of the country that is driving our economy. And so, when we take money from those people, we take it from the productive engine and we bring it to Ottawa, we undermine economic growth. And economic growth is that magic elixir that fixes nearly every economic problem. You got inflation, economic growth. You got debt or deficit, economic growth. You got unemployment, economic growth. It is the answer to nearly every economic problem. And I heard the member, and I agree with her. I heard Ms. Derowitz talk about productivity and innovation. We are terrible at that. I think that's the only word I can use. We are terrible. We're near the bottom of the OECD, near the bottom of the G7 when it comes to innovation. But this full economic stack, other than repackaging one program, doesn't have any really strong, powerful things that could move us forward. If it did, that might be a different ballpark. We might be able to have a discussion. If we were serious about productivity. So we looked at countries like Ireland that have been serious about it. Switzerland, they've had full economic plans that involve both policies from the left and the right. Targeted tax cuts to encourage economic growth in targeted areas. So there are certain areas that we can pretty much say, you know what, that's going to have a big part of our economic growth in going forward. Artificial intelligence. So why don't we provide a series of technical and benefits? Our SR&ED system is terribly out of date, and it doesn't work like it's supposed to. Why not take the opportunity and say, you know what, we're going to have a slowdown, and we know that Canada's productivity, which is measured in GDP per hour, is worse than the United States, worse than Ireland, Switzerland is nearly double ours, and Switzerland doesn't have the advantages that we have of the tremendous natural resources, just the sheer size of our country. Why would we not tackle that and go, okay? And by the way, for all the talk of the subsidies that oil and gas gets, which I'm not going to get into today, oil and gas, you know what? The average Canadian contributes GDP per hour $50. Do you know what it is in oil and gas? $600. Their productivity, the single thing that Canadian economy is struggling with most, and we are going to kneecap that industry. Clean Canadian energy has to be part of the economic solution. It will drive our economy going forward. As we transition to other fuels, we cannot simply just disobey and just say, you know what, we're going to go to this, we're going to just completely eliminate an industry that is a productivity leader for our country. And we cannot abandon the workers across this country in clean, sustainable Canadian energy. And we need to, so when we look at this, when we look at the picture of this, we need to, and I agree with Ms. Darowitz, we need to enhance our innovation. We need to enhance our productivity. But there's nothing in this fall economic statement that will have a substantive impact. I've been saying this House since I got elected in 2019. We need to drive productivity, because if we are able to make things more efficiently, more effectively, quicker, if we are able to innovate quicker, more efficiently, more effectively than the rest of the world, we win. We all win. You know, you don't increase the wealth of a country by printing money. No country's ever taxed itself in prosperity. It's never happened, not once. In fact, it just is absolutely so frustrating to me, because we see socialist nightmare after socialist nightmare after socialist nightmare. From Venezuela to Cuba to the Soviet Union, we know where socialism leads. It leads to poverty. We tax and tax and tax and tax. And we say to those Canadians that are working the hardest out there that it's unfathomable to me that a Canadian starting at $14,000, this government believes that they should start paying tax on that. $14,000. What's the poverty line that? Like 3, 4, 5 times that? So a simple way of helping people is just taking less of their money. And this fall economic statement has nothing in that to relieve the Canadian. And I also agree with my colleague, Mr. Blakey, when he says that this money should, or at least he can correct me, I'm sure he will, if I'm incorrect, that some of this money should go to deficit and debt reduction. And if I can tell tales out of school, he's told me before that, you know, having a strong balance book is important to him. And so we agree on that point. And you know what, if the government said, you know, we are flush with revenues, here's what we're going to do. We are going to take that money and we're going to dramatically reduce the deficit or the debt. But they're not. I mean, it does look decent, and I give them that, that the deficit's going down, and I hear that. But that's because of inflation. They're just taking more money from the most vulnerable and enriching themselves, and then sending that money back out. That's the reality. That's the reality of this. And they're spending $6 billion more. If they had followed what the deputy leader of the Liberal Party had said, and said that they were going to follow the pay-as-you-go system, and that every new dollar of spending was to be met by a dollar of spending reduction, that's a different ballpark. But that's not what they're doing. There's more spending. And let's look at this track record of this government's balance sheet. So it was given a balanced budget by the previous government. We were given, even after going through the worst economic crisis of a generation, the Harper government still managed to balance the books, to bring that balance sheet into line. And then what happened? $100 billion of pre-COVID deficit spending. $100 billion. You are given the keys, and the balance sheet, and you drive it right into the ditch. $100 billion worth. And they said, you know, we're fine. We've got strong. We've got what was the what was Bill Morneau's comment? I think he had lots of fiscal firepower was the comment of the day. Well, it turned out he was about 400 billion short of what they needed. And so they engaged and embarked in an aggressive quantitative easing program, which is, we can go through the machinations of it back and forth, but it really acquaints to money printing. So $400 billion. Every time this has been tried, like back to the Romans, like every time a government thinks, well, we've got a great idea. This is fantastic. We control the printing presses. We'll never have any deficit or debt problems. We can just print more money. It happened. It happened in Yugoslavia. It happened in Argentina. It happened in the Weimar Republic. It happened in the 70s, right here in North America, where they turned on the printing presses on high, and once again we were faced with inflation. And so we had $100 billion of pre-COVID spending. And then, according to this government's parliamentary budget officer, there was another $200 billion in non-COVID related expenditures. Non-COVID related $200 billion. So that's $300 billion. That equates to about $20,000 for every Canadian family of four, or actually a little bit more than that. And so that's $20,000 that they received, that Canadians received in non-COVID deficit spending. I talk to my constituents, and they're not telling me that they're $20,000 to the good after the last 3 years of spending. And I would not hesitate to say that if that $200 billion plus the $100 billion was instead of either put on the debt or deficit, as Mr. Blakey, I think, insinuated, or they said, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, but that would put us in a much better position, because right now going forward, according to the fiscal statement, we're looking at debt charges of about $40 billion. I think that's roughly equivalent to the health transfers that this federal government pays out every year. We would not have to be paying that if that $300 billion had, instead of being spent on things like Arrive scam and other reckless liberal projects into to Frank Baylis, amongst others, through a series of companies. If that money was left in the pocket, either left in the pockets of government, and we paid down debt or deficit, where we wouldn't have to pay the $40 billion in interest charges, or even better yet, if it was left in the pockets of Canadians, because what will happen is that if in fact we leave more money in the hands of our workers, of our job creators, they will invest that money. And they said Ms. Darowitz was absolutely correct. Canadians, for every dollar that an American invests in, American company invests in capital investment, Canadians invest 43 cents. That's the statistics. That's what's real. And part of that, I don't understand how you cannot then take that as to one of the major expenses for any Canadian business is taxes. And it's directly controllable by government. And so if we reduce our share, it only makes sense that that companies, that individuals will have more money to invest in the technology of the future. Because if we don't get this right, and I say this in all seriousness, we're going to have serious challenges down the road, because we are not investing in capital as much as the United States. We are not innovating. We're not investing in our innovation like many of our OECD partners. In fact, we were last at the OECD in terms of capital investment. And so, but the solution to that is not more taxation. And that's the part that I don't understand with a 2% tax on share buybacks. I don't even know whether that will be meaningful. I suppose economists will will comment on that, and I'm eager to hear their expert testimony. But at 2%, I suspect it won't even meaningfully impact anyone's behavior. But why is it there's always two options? There's a carrot and a stick with all of these policies. Why does the government always go to the stick? Why could they not give those companies that are doing things right with respect to productivity and innovation a break? Or why could they not, even if they wanted to take a more traditional left-wing approach, invest in research, invest in education? Ireland has been very in my study of their economy, and they're moving ahead of us when it comes to innovation and productivity. In fact, they are ahead of us. They've been very nimble as an economic policy. They're a unitary state, so granted, it's a little bit easier for them. But in both on a left-wing and a right-wing side, so they are investing dramatically and quickly into their education system. So they see an opportunity for artificial intelligence, for genetics research, for the economy of the future, and they start paying for education in those fields, and paying for research, and paying for development. Of course, one of the big gaps that our economy has had is we've always had and continue to have some of the brightest minds in the entire world. And some of that is because we attract so many great newcomers to our country, and we need an immigration system that actually welcomes folks. I can't tell you how many individuals that come to my constituency office are so disappointed and so despondent at the treatment that they've received from this federal government. And let me be clear on the record, we need newcomers. We need the diversity in our country. We need the brain power that they bring. We need their labor. But we have to make it less arduous for them. I'll give you one example. We had in our riding a machine that was tens of millions of dollars. We needed a team. They needed a team from India to help install it. This was not even a long-term immigration issue. They were just coming for a couple months to help get this machine off the go, which drives jobs, which drives productivity. They had to wait months and months and months and months and months. And every day that machine sat idle was thousands of dollars, was employees that had to be laid off because we couldn't get out of our own way. So there are things within the bureaucracy. There are very left-wing ideas that could help move the ball forward. But this government won't even do that. They won't even stay true to their own ideology. And then the other thing that Ireland does very smartly, and many other countries, including the United States and Switzerland, are targeted tax cuts, tax relief systems, and updated regulatory systems. Our Income Tax Act is way, way out of date. We need to have substantive reform there. Like I said, the SR&ED system is broken. Ask any expert, ask anyone in the technology industry. It's not working. It's not helping to innovate. And so, why not instead of targeting these with a 2% tax on share buybacks? Why not help these companies? Why not provide them targeted relief that will encourage them, not relief to, as the NDP have rightly pointed out, not relief that will lead to them racking up profits or to paying huge dividends while all the same time collecting corporate welfare in the form of wage subsidies or otherwise. We need to have targeted, smart tax relief, and we would not be creating new ground here. There are all sorts of countries, jurisdictions around the world. Even some of our provinces are leading the way with respect to that. I know Ontario has done great things. Alberta has done great things. So why not look to some of the Ontario and Alberta processes to help attract some of these businesses and to grow productivity that everyone, it appears, around this table agrees. But this fall economic statement just didn't have anything. So short term, my concern, hopefully short term, is the affordability crisis. And when I look at the affordability crisis, I don't see anything in the fall economic statement. As I said earlier, like no one in my constituency was calling up and saying, Philip, what we need is a 2% tax on shareholder buybacks so that public companies can have more capital. I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that once. Maybe it's different in some of the other constituencies, but in Northumberland, Peterborough South, that was not even brought up. What I have heard over and over again is that the cost of living is is just getting too expensive, that these Liberals are just pricing people out of their homes, pricing people literally out of their grocery stores and into food banks. And then long term is the productivity and innovation piece. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I've spoken numerous times in the House about this. But there's nothing really substantive in there. And one of the pieces that's missing that I think most experts will comment and talk about is the fact that we have a gap between the great researchers we have, the great post-secondary education, and a final product. It's not the research product part that we could always use more research, but it's that development piece. And I've had, as part of the pre-budget consultations, of course, I get to hear from many different industries, many different institutions about this gap in the Canadian economy. And everything from auto manufacturing to artificial intelligence to cancer research, they all say the same thing. We're not investing in that development piece. So what that means is that they do great work at the U of T, at Mars, at University of Waterloo, and they come up with amazing ideas. And then, unfortunately, many times either the people or the ideas or both work their way across the border or to the EU, and we as Canadians don't get necessarily the benefit of these great ideas as we should. And this is something that we could certainly work on a nonpartisan basis. I think all parties, I think most experts see this as an issue with respect to the Canadian economy, and quite frankly, have seen it for decades. And this is something that I was hoping to see in the fall economic statement, a real commitment to increasing the productivity and innovation of our country for the long term of our country. When we get back to the process of this legislation and why I do feel it's important to talk, and I don't believe that hearing Mr. Blakey, Mr. Beach, or Mr. Baker or Ms. Chantel talk, I don't believe it's ever a waste of time. I believe my colleagues have valuable input, and I believe that they were put here, and the taxpayers spend those billions of dollars so we can talk out those debates, talk out those discussions. And in fact, as in Good to Great, if anyone's read that book by Jim Collins, a fabulous book, highly recommended. And I see I got a smile. And one of the things that he writes in there is that a lot of ideas are bad ideas, and if you propose an idea, it's more likely to be bad than good. It's more likely to hurt than help. And that's why Parliament's meant to be like this. It's meant to be a vetting process, right? So that we have those hedgehog ideas. They get through that empower Canada to own the next century. But part of that, it's important to say no. It can't just be yes, 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 because if you have 100 priorities, you don't have a priority. And so when we are going through this, it's our job as His Majesty's, still getting used to his part, His Majesty's loyal opposition is to critique this and to be the one who fearlessly say no, that is not a good idea. And in fact, that is incorrect. And like I said, as Jim Collins wrote in Good to Great, the chances are that we're right more often than we're not than when we say no. And sometimes the best thing a government can do is say, no, let's not do that. I mean, as Edmund Burke wrote many, many years ago, why would we just on a whim throw out the tried and true for something new and unproven? And so the hours that we spend in Parliament, I think, are incredibly valuable. And I will continue to discuss it unapologetically. And quite frankly, like I said, I don't care who I irritate or who I annoy. I'm here for the people of Northumberland, Peterborough South, and for Canadians. And if that means angering or annoying people, that's fine. I do it to my 7-year-old daughter all the time, and I'm happy to do it here in Parliament as well. But one element that I want to go back to, because I think it I'm hoping it might actually be a fertile area of future discussion and amendments. Is I had a PMB with respect to propane and natural gas for farmers and giving them an exemption for the carbon tax. And actually, it's being carried forward by Ben Lobb, a member from Huron Bruce. It's PMB 234. And I think it'll do some great things, and I'm looking forward to it receiving royal assent, because some farmers are paying tens of thousands of dollars. But in the discussion of that legislation, the part that I actually found the most shocking is that we charge GST on carbon tax. Like that. How does that make sense? If a private corporation did that, the NDP would be just absolutely losing their mind. But that's what the government is. They're charging a tax on a tax. In what world does that make sense? The most bizarre part about that is, though, as part of the PMB discussions, we had a member from a finance department come before me, and I just had sort of my initial sort of ground setting questions, and one of them was, do we charge GST on the carbon tax? He said no. That's the Ministry of Finance. They didn't know that they charge GST on the carbon tax. Of course, a couple months later, without apology, but just as a way of explanation in as many words as possible, and as a fulsome word salad as you'd ever see, he admitted that yes, they do in fact charge the GST on the carbon tax. Later on my questioning of charging the GST and the carbon tax as to why they did that, because I know that we have a number of individuals here who are experts on tax policy and even worked for the federal government to great esteem and to high regard, would be aware that nowhere in tax policy does it say it's good policy to charge tax on a tax. There are different schools of thoughts that say, where someone's wealth increases, that they should pay their greater share, and that makes sense. But the fact that your belief that you should be paying more GST because you pay more carbon tax, that doesn't hold water. It doesn't make sense. So an easy fix, and I think it would be one that's relatively consistent with what the NDP are calling for, which along with us, which is the removal of GST on home heating, would be, let's maybe just at least reduce the carbon tax by the GST we pay on the carbon tax. And by the by, it also blows up the liberal narrative that that the carbon tax is revenue neutral, because that GST you don't get back. You don't get that as part of the carbon tax rebate. That GST is just money that goes through government greed and to the coffers of the government, through the ever-expanding, insatiable greed of the government and getting more and more and more Canadians. And let's also put this in context here, right? So the single mom, she starts paying tax at $14,000. That's the personal exemption. However, the trillionaires, the billionaires, do you know how many people from the Panama Papers have paid taxes on those claims? Zero. Do you know how many dollars have been collected from the Panama Papers? Of course, the Panama Papers listed a number of Canadians with respect to tax evasion, and these are not small numbers. These are not like maybe the CRA could back off the small business owner trying to make their way, and instead of in the fall economic statement asking for thousands of more dollars so they can have thousands of more auditors, maybe they could focus on the Panama Papers, which is now many years away, and they have not collected a single penny. Like, I understand it might be easier to audit a small business owner who's trying his best to earn that money, but what about the billionaires and the trillionaires who are named in the Panama Papers, who are still not $1 has been collected. Not one individual has gone to jail. Not one. And these are serious dollars. So let's focus our guns where they should be. Instead of cracking down, or like as the former finance minister called small business owners when he called them tax cheats. Yet his friends, the folks he vacations with in the millionaire island, the billionaire islands, they're fine. They're fine. Let's just let the Panama Papers and all the people that are evading taxes to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars. Did we see any update in the fall economic statement about that? I didn't see any. I know I've certainly heard Peter Julian from the NDP and many others, and our leader of the opposition has always been clear that every Canadian should pay their fair share. And I'm calling on this government again. Let's get an update before we shake down another innocent, hardworking Canadian business owner with another needless audit. Let's go after the trillionaires. Let's go after the folks who were named in the Panama Papers for illegally avoiding Canadian taxations. It's those tax havens that this government should be going after if they're in need of that revenue. And when we have that revenue, and right now we have record revenue because of inflation, because we've taken as a percentage so much more from hardworking Canadians. Let's apply that to debt reduction, well, we have to start with deficit reduction, of course, and maybe one day, a miracle of miracles, and maybe we'll pull out Adam's socks there, and we'll actually get $1 of debt reduction, which will help all of us. It will help Canadians by reducing, hopefully, the tax burden going forward, and it also help Social Democrats as they have more money to spend on the projects that they would like. But a bigger deficit, a bigger debt doesn't help anyone. And so when we look at the future, we need to have a fall economic statement that I'm hoping. In fact, I know that underneath a Poilievre government, we won't have a fall economic statement that says that it's just a litany of failure after failure. So the Liberals when they fail, the good news is they get to re-announce the same program over and over and over again. And that's what we saw in there. So their 7-year poll, after 7 years of these Liberals being in charge, we have high interest rates, which are driving up the cost of everyone, which making it nearly impossible for many Canadians to afford a house. And some are giving up the ability ever to own a home, which is just so sad. We have continued high inflation which drives up the cost of everything. And like I said, if you're a millionaire or a billionaire or a trillionaire, you're watching some of your assets continue to increase in value. But if you're a hardworking person, if you're like family members of mine who are on the line or working at a steel plant or in a mine or in a field growing crops, that inflation hurts, and it hurts a lot. And it's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It's their ability to feed their family. And quite frankly, we've seen the evidence of that. We've seen record food bank usage. Food bank usage has increased by over 20%. 1.5 million Canadians in 1 month went to a food bank, 500,000 of which were children. So we've got high interest rates, high inflation, and the government says, oh, by the way, in order to counteract the inflation that we created, that both the current Governor of Bank of Canada and the future Liberal leader, Mark Carney, said is a Canadian phenomenon. So we have that self-inflicted wound of inflation. In order to fix that ailment, we're also going to slow the economy. And of course, slowing the economy isn't just numbers either. That's not just GDP going down. That's good, hardworking Canadians, women and men across this land who are going to lose their job. So this is their document. Like they produce this document, and what they're telling Canadians is you've got high inflation to deal with, high interest rates. No doubt that some Canadians will lose their homes because of those who are having to either re-up their fixed mortgage, or if they've got a variable, they've probably, depending on how it's structured, seen an increase in their payments. Canadians before this were within $200 of insolvency. So guess what happens if your interest rate goes up by $200? It continues to increase. And then on top of that, you've now got a slowing economic growth. We've got economic growth that, according to this projection, is either just on the knife's edge of being a recession, or in their downward projection is indeed a recession. So we've got high interest rates, high inflation, and low economic growth. This is a triple economic nightmare that 7 years of Liberal government has led to, and it's making Canada. It's increasingly pricing Canadians out of their own country, and I believe that Mr. Chair, who's up next on the speaking order, Mr.
I don't think we have anybody, so okay, shall we call the vote?
No, I'm going to keep
no more
going there. That's
discussion?
okay. That's all right. It's all right. I just was curious there. So I wanted to go back to the GST on the carbon tax. So a tax on a tax there. So I cannot, and I have not yet been provided a reason. And if any of the Ministry of Finance individuals are on listening to this, and they want to send over to my office an individual and explain to me why the GST is passed on the carbon tax at a time when we already have record costs on home heating fuel and on other expenses, I am more than willing to listen. But to me, it does not make a sense. And so why would we not remove the GST from the carbon tax? I'm not even talking about removing the GST from the actual home heating fuel. GST is charged on the carbon tax, which is charged on the home heating fuel. And it does not make any sense whatsoever. But you know what? I know my colleagues are very eager to also make some comments here. And so I will pass the floor. I believe Mr. Chambers is on the list now, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I believe so. MP Chambers.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Should have wore different socks today, I guess.
Yeah. I know. Where are your socks?
Usually wear those on Mondays.
I'll go back.
I think we need a subcommittee meeting. It might be a way to resolve this issue. It seems to me that there's probably some kind of path to a resolution here. I think this happens every single fall economic statement time, and we usually figure it out. So I think there's probably some reasonable options on the table, but there was a wonderful suggestion earlier about suspending and letting some people chat about it. Ms. Zarowitz made that suggestion. But like my colleague, Mr. Blakey, I preferred to not show up on Wednesday without any kind of resolution, since we always seem to find a way to make it work. Mr. Chair, what time do we have resources till this evening?
I think we still have some time.
Okay. Well, this will be very interesting. I guess we can buckle up then. We somehow always seem to find ourselves in the same spot. There's a little low trust environment. We have some new folks here, and that's okay. But the government is continuing to manage its parliamentary calendar in a way that seems it thinks it holds a complete majority. It forces the NDP to vote for some things that I don't think the NDP generally wishes to support. But it also doesn't always leave a lot of room for negotiation. There's, we're going to do this and we don't need you. That's okay. I mean, we can stay here all night. I guess we should get some more speakers on the speaking list. your Phil's back on?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Just a brief respite.
I think we owe it to Canadians to do thorough reviews of legislation. We have agreed to pre-studies previously. We agreed to a pre-study of the budget, although we were in a kind of similar position as we are now, but we did agree to a pre-study of the budget. I can't recall what we did last year, but we did make some concessions on getting an audit for the CERB, which is coming in early December. People should mark their calendars for that because the Auditor General is going to review the process that CRA used to give out CERB and other payments. And it's notable because it's the same process that the government is planning to use for the dental benefit. And one wonders why the government was so hastily moving the dental benefit through the parliamentary process. I think it's because they wanted to do so before the audit came out, because there's some challenges, as the parliamentary budget officer has noted, with the self-attestation process. And so, the government wanted to make it about, well, if you vote against the dental plan, you're voting against Kids Healthy Smiles. And it's all about process and procedure and not about substance. You could have taken the same amount of money and, by the way, saved $100 million of administrative costs and given that money to provinces to increase the eligibility criteria for all of their existing programming using their infrastructure. And that was my primary objection to the dental care bill, but I'm looking forward to the Auditor General's report on that front. And I think that, we should also have time as a committee to have the Auditor General come back and talk about that. But we won't get to do that if we're going to continue talking about these kinds of things. So I would encourage some kind of subcommittee meeting, some kind of calendar, till the end of the year to get there. So I don't even know when the last subcommittee meeting was, but I can't recall. Now, I'm not invited to those. I would wear my socks to them.
Just on that, MP Chambers, so I thought you did have your socks on.
No.
I thought that magic was going to happen. I thought we were going to get something done and we'd be able to start the study. It doesn't look like that's happening. So members, again, we are going to have to suspend